1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. One, two, three. Hey, good Monday, everybody. It's Chief Meteorologist Brad Panovich here. We are on a Monday evening now after the 4th of July weekend, and boy, we have a lot to talk about today. Today's show, we'll be talking a lot about two tropical flood events, one that happened that's national news in Texas and one locally that happened yesterday. Tropical Storm Chantal did some odd things and localized, produce epic flood amounts. And Tim Buckley's going to join us because this impacted some of his viewing area, impacted some of ours, but didn't impact a lot of central North Carolina. But we'll start with the local forecast first, as we always do. We got to talk about some heat heading our way, and that's kind of the story here in the short term. We've got a ton of heat. You probably felt it today. I'm going to start with the radar and satellite because the good news is there's not a lot of rain out there now. We need at least 24 hours to dry out. But I will tell you, we're starting to see some late day development, which is something we'll keep an eye on because you could see the storms developing there. As we go into central North Carolina, there's still what we call an area flood warning. It's basically because of the runoff from the flooding yesterday. There's not widespread flooding, but because the runoff into the creeks and streams, and they're all running super high, and a lot of roads are still blocked or closed off. I think at one point, 120 roads. Is that right, James? Some weird number like that?
Yeah, the DOT had a lot of road closures last night.
Yeah, so there was a lot. So that's just, that warning is up until 12:30 tomorrow morning, which is tonight, 12:30 in the morning tomorrow, just to keep people aware that there's a lot of standing water out there. And that's going to be an issue. I'll show you some of the flood amounts or the rainfall amounts because this is going to be a really unique setup, and Tim and I will talk more about this. This very narrow band of heavy, heavy rain, it really got going strong in parts of the Sandhills. This is around Southern Pines, Pinehurst. We had a ton of videos and pictures from viewers. Thank you for everybody sending those in around Pinehurst with some pretty big flooding. Even northern parts of the Lumberton area, we saw some flooding as well, Sampson County area. But then it got really crazy as we got later into the evening. Look at the rainfall amounts between Greensboro and Raleigh. Greensboro, I think, had a half an inch at one point, and Raleigh had about a half an inch. But then you go 30 minutes to the west, or 30 minutes to the east, not even that, in some cases 15, you got into 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 inches of rain, and a lot of that fell in about 6 hours. We're going to talk about these rainfall occurrences and how heavy this rainfall is, because it's pretty crazy. Now, the heat, though, as I mentioned, is going to be a big story. It is going to be super hot. It's hot right now. It's 97 degrees. It's not even cooling down here in the evening. And the high temperature today was 97. I'm kind of curious if we're going to have one of those weird in-between hours where it jumps up to 98. There's the high, 97 and 72. Thanks, James, for kind of seeing there. The record's 100. It's a bad sign when you're closer to the record high than the normal high. That kind of tells you how hot it's going to be. And so tonight, not much of a cool down. Those temperatures are only going to fall back into the mid 70s, and that's always problematic. When it's 6 or 7 in the morning and the feel like reading's 81 and the air temperature 76, you know it's going to be a hot day, because even though we're not at the summer solstice, we're past it, it's still some of the longest daylight of the year. You're going to get up into the mid and upper 90s if you're starting at 76 or 75 in the morning. It just does not take very long. And so tomorrow is going to be one of those days where we want you to stay alert. And the reason we want to be alert is there's two things you're going to hear us talk a lot about today: flooding and heat. Those are 1 and 2, the biggest killers from weather phenomena, and rip currents. We could throw those in there, which we had some of that issue this weekend as well.
We did.
I know because of Chantal and because of the holiday weekend, we had a lot of rescues and even some fatalities out at the coast. But heat is one of those things that causes widespread issues and can sneak up on you. High upper 90s. So, we're talking 98, 99. If we were 97 today, I don't see why we couldn't be a degree or two warmer tomorrow, because the setup is warmer and the heat index will likely be higher. So stay hydrated, stay cool tomorrow. That's going to be a big part of it. We already have that, what we call major heat impacts in the forecast tomorrow. You'll see today we are in the moderate range. Tomorrow, look at all the red on the map. That tells you major impacts. And even on Wednesday, we're going to see some major impacts, but they're lessened because there's going to be more pop-up storms and showers around, which will help us out slightly, actually keeping us just a little bit cooler. So tomorrow during the day, the worst of it, I said 11 to 7, but if you want to really avoid the worst of it, it's around noon to 5. That's when the heat index will probably the entire time be 100 plus. And typically that's when we start getting concerned. 98 air temperature, 100 to 102 heat indices. Your body just needs help cooling itself. It just can't do it efficiently. We talked about cooling centers in the past. This is the kind of afternoon where you got to be in air conditioning. It's just a fan doesn't cut it, because your sweat is not going to work really good tomorrow. So one of the things we'll watch after the heat moves out is we've got this, I don't want to call it a stalled front because it hasn't stalled yet, but we're expecting this front to our northwest to get down here Wednesday, Thursday, and I really think Thursday, Friday, that front's going to stall over us. And because it stalls over us, every single day there's going to be afternoon and evening storms, and not your typical pop-up like we're seeing today and tomorrow. These will be a little bit more widespread. Tomorrow just isolated, but look at Wednesday. We start to see more of these widespread showers and storms. And again, if it was one day of this, probably not a big deal, but the problem is we could see multiple days of pop-up showers and storms over the exact same areas, and during this time frame, we're going to have one of these setups where we have deep tropical moisture. Look at this moisture. I don't even know what color. Guys, tell me what color that is, because I deal with this every time I show this graphic. Is it salmon? Is that like...
Salmon's a good representation of what that color is. I feel like
Lily,
that was one of my
color do you
wedding
think that
colors, and I
is?
should know it.
I want to say coral, but I think it's a little too pink for that.
Yeah. I struggle with it. The only reason I say that, it's hard to describe what that color is. So whatever that color is, coral, salmon, I don't know. It's weird. But it's tropical in nature. So typically when we see that color, that means precipitable water, which is a measurement we use of how much moisture is in the calm atmosphere, is usually over 2 inches. Just for the layman, 2 inches, that's a lot of moisture. Think about trying to clean a table off with a saturated sponge, and there's just constant water getting. You can't mop anything up. You can't wash anything. It just causes water everywhere. So any storms that develop Thursday, Friday, they're going to produce a ton of rain. So over the next 7 days, we're starting to see some pretty strong signals that we could see 5, 6, 7 inches over the next 7 days. Now, just like we're going to talk about here in a minute, and I'll look at that, all of a sudden the graphic got messed up. That is not the correct graphic. something happened to our graphic. That it looks like a one-day rainfall forecast. I don't know why that's weird. It actually got messed up. So just ignore that. Actually, the rainfall amounts will be much more than that. We hope it'd be that light, but Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the rain chances really ramp up. We go 50, 80, 70%, okay? And so 3 days in a row of that is going to cause issues. So right now, we're weather alert for tomorrow for heat, but I have a pretty good suspicion we'll probably be alert at least Thursday, Friday for heavy rain. Not that we're not going to have heavy rain on Wednesday, but what I think is going to happen, it's going to be one of those things that'll happen over time, because every day getting repeated storms, it starts getting worse and worse as the week goes on. And we'll show you the 10-day forecast. Plenty of storms in this forecast. So this is a pretty wet pattern by summer standards. Typically 20 to 40% would be your everyday pop-up storms. The fact that we're seeing 80, 70, 50, 60s in there, it's a pretty good sign we have some heavy storms coming in. So we'll talk more about that, but flooding and heat will be the story. Stay tuned. Tim and I will talk about the flooding. All right, welcome back. Tim Buckley will be joining me here momentarily, but the talk of the weekend and really the talk of the past day or so, it just keeps getting higher and higher, talking about the flash flooding in Texas and now here in North Carolina. I wanted to briefly touch on the Texas flooding before we get to our local flooding, which we had pretty prolific flooding in parts of central North Carolina. Tim's going to come in here shortly, and this was a part of his viewing area that got impacted pretty heavily. Part of our viewing area was clipped by this, and we were streaming most of the afternoon yesterday as this system, Chantal, was moving through. But in Texas, the death toll, unfortunately, is up to 102 as of this stream, and there's still people missing. This is going to go down as one of the deadliest flood events we have seen in an area that is already considered flash flood alley down there in Texas. So this is going to be one of those things we're going to be talking about probably for days and weeks, but we have this report from Texas on the latest on the efforts and recovery going on from the Texas Hill Country.
This search is still well underway right now. There's 10 kids as of last update that are still missing. One camp counselor from that camp, that's that side of it. We heard earlier this morning at least 80 people, 80 bodies have been found so far. We're here at this command center. We got here about half an hour ago. This is our first time that we've come here. We've been over the past couple of days kind of touring the devastation, watching the search on the ground. I'll tell you, one of the concerns that some of these search crews are sharing with us today is the weather. So we are on day 5. This is the 5th consecutive day that the Hill Country, specifically this area, has been on a flood watch. So they're really concerned that perhaps in the next hour to 3 hours, storms could start coming again and potentially cause what they're calling catastrophic flooding. Hopefully that isn't going to happen again, but that was an issue that thwarted some of the search efforts yesterday when some of the search crews in some of the hardest hit areas down on the banks of the river had to evacuate suddenly just because the river started rising again.
Yeah, just devastation there in Texas. Tim Buckley joins me from WFMY. Good to see you again, Tim. We're going to get to our local flooding here, but I wanted to just briefly touch on the Texas flooding here as we talk about, because it is just, it's heartbreaking. And there's been a lot of controversy and talk, blame games been going on. I don't want to get into any of that right now because the recovery effort's still ongoing. People are grieving. There will be time for that. But I did want to show people, I built this graphic today, and I know, Tim, you did one with Chantal, but a lot of folks asking, where did this come from? Like, how did all this rain fall? And one of the things that was kind of sneaky about this setup was it was the remnants of another tropical system. Just like Chantal caused flooding here, the remnants of Barry kind of went unnoticed, moved into central Mexico a week ago today. Okay, and I'm going to show you the loop. It moved up through central Mexico. Now remember, there's not radar coverage into Mexico, so trust me, there was rain in these locations. But watch the circulation move north towards the Rio Grande on Tuesday of last week. And by Wednesday, we started getting the early heads up. The Weather Prediction Center actually put out an outlook for the possibility of widespread flood risk in central Texas. We didn't know where, though, at the time. But then the remnants moved up there, and I want you guys to watch this. I'm just going to let it play out. watch the circulation move into central Texas Thursday into Friday and just sit over the Texas Hill Country. I mean, there was 2 or 3 days of rain in that area, but it really was the Thursday into Friday morning time frame where the worst rain fell. And it fell in an area, for people not familiar with the hill country of Texas, it's called that reason because it's hilly. Okay, there's a lot of hills. The soil's hard packed. They have very thin topsoil. There's numerous creeks and streams. It's a beautiful area. That's why there's so many of these camps and vacation areas. But it is called Flash Flood Alley for a reason. There are more flash floods there than just about anywhere in the country. And this one is going to go down in the record books as one of the worst. But it's not the first. There have been several floods in this area. What was hard about this is it happened 4th of July weekend. The warnings were out, but they didn't get to the people because it was the middle of the night and it was 4th of July weekend. So there's going to be a lot of social science that goes into why this happened, but there's a lot of meteorology as well, that we had this heavy rain event. So I want to bring Tim in. And Tim, the Texas flooding was devastating, but then on Sunday, we get our own dose of flooding. Thankfully not as deadly, but still very impactful. Talk a little bit about yesterday's coverage from your standpoint and some of the crazy flood and rainfall numbers you guys have seen.
Well, yeah, and Brad, I'm glad you brought that up, and I think it's interesting to kind of, put these side by side. There are similarities and there are differences. Both involve tropical systems. Both involve tropical systems that, to be quite honest with you, weren't that impressive or strong on the face, right? When we talk about Chantal coming into the coast, I mean, that wasn't a big storm for our beaches. They're built for that sort of thing. It can, blow over 50-mile-per-hour tropical storm, no problem. And they didn't have too many issues. What was interesting about this for us, and we saw this in some of the models, and you'll see this here on the loop, kind of the way I've been trying to explain this to people is as far as the why goes. Why did we have 3, 4, 5 counties that had such prolific rainfall totals? You had this little bit of a subtle kind of pivot or a curve to the path. It's not like it stayed on a straightaway. It's almost like you're driving your car down the highway. You're going along fine and it's straight. If you have to make a pretty sharp curve, you've got to slow down and then you've got to focus on changing that momentum. This storm kind of did that, and it pivoted right there, starting out in Moore County, then in Chatham, then in Mebane and the Alamance, Orange County areas. So when it slowed down like that, you already had the torrential rain there, but it just made it last a lot longer. And there was some forcing that just created these downpours that really scary to see when you're tracking this on radar. This is not going to end anytime soon. And we started getting in some really bad pictures of flooding, Brad, right around 5 to 6 o'clock. And just knowing that rain was going to continue until 9, 10, 11, 12. That was the point where we knew, okay, this is not going to be a minor flood. This is going to be major flooding. And scramble the crews, sound the alarms, get off the roads. Thankfully, I think a lot of people started to heed those warnings. The phones buzzed. The Weather Service got that job down pat for sure, but we still had a lot of people caught on I-40, which was trying to be closed, but you always have cars that are stuck out there. So it was a little chaotic. It could have been worse in terms of the human impact, but still pretty tragic to see. I mean, this water was rising up around people's homes. What were your thoughts when you were kind of seeing this develop? I mean, you didn't even get a drop of rain in Charlotte, but we have about 11, 12-inch totals over in Mebane.
That was the thing that was weird to tell people, hey, there's all this flooding going on 2 counties to our east, and it was sunny and beautiful here. In fact, we only hit 86 here. We broke our 90-degree streak because of the clouds and the wind, and it was wild. We started getting the pictures from Pinehurst, Southern Pines area in Moore County, and I thought maybe that might be the worst. And then, like you, I saw it starting to slow down up towards you. And boy, man, that's when I was like, man, that's a bad spot to be stalling out, because I know a lot more people up there, and there's a lot more creeks and streams. And I know your station was on this, and your crews were out covering it today. And we want to take a quick look at some of the damage that they saw today, because it was pretty extensive when the light of day came up this morning.
From Haw River, I'm Ben Briscoe. The rushing water had such a strong force that here on Jimmy Kerr Road, it actually peeled the pavement off the street from this bridge. We're talking 2 inches thick of pavement here, moved like it was nothing. Behind me, you can see that giant tree also spans the entire bridge. The force of the water just knocking it over last night. You know, since I've been out here, I have seen debris from houses, from yards, just floating down the river. A little while ago, I saw part of a roof go by.
Had a total of 25 storm-related incidents they were called to.
All of our units were out responding last night due to the call volume. They ran about 3 times the average number of calls in a 24-hour period yesterday, and most of those fell in about a 6-hour period.
One particular incident?
While everyone got a lot of rain, but parts of the city really got significantly more than others.
Cars trapped in the rising floodwaters of Little Alamance Creek.
One water rescue scenario, 4 people were rescued from cars that were in floodwaters. And thankfully, no one here in Burlington was injured or harmed in all these events.
In Burlington, I'm Manning Franks.
Yeah, so Tim, just impressive damage, and you got the graphic there. Kind of put this in perspective for people watching this that don't know the Haw River, where it's at, and how really historic that crest is. And the number 1 on that one should stick out to a lot of people in the Carolinas.
Yeah. Right, you've been here a long time. 1996 is a year you should remember for weather. That's obviously Hurricane Fran, one of the worst storms to kind of hit the state. Every part of the state has their worst storms, right? But in Alamance County, over toward the Raleigh area, Fran is right there towards the top as well. Haw River, for example, it does roll right through Alamance County. If you ever drive between Charlotte, Greensboro, and Raleigh, it's right there by the Tanger outlets. That's where you are on the Mebane side of things. But the Haw goes continuing down south, so it impacts other small towns throughout Chatham County, throughout Alamance County, and it's really one of these big rivers that can change very, very quickly. So here are some of the historic numbers. Number 1 on the list, it survived by the skin, hairs on its chin here, half a foot. That's the measure now. But these 2 pictures were taken in the same spot. This is the town of Saxbahaw. Fun to say, fun to visit. But they had a tough time today, of course. On the left, that's this morning. On the right, that's 1996. Basically about the same. Now in Saxbahaw, down that way, at that part of the river, they actually did break the Hurricane Fran record. So in those areas, they had that highest crest. And people were they were mostly out of the way by this morning because the word had been out at this point. So just kind of onlooking and gawking at what was going on. But pretty jaw-dropping to see that. But if you get 10 inches of rain in half a day, there's no secret as to why that flooding is going to happen. Some people are talking about, well, can we plan better for this or that or the other flooding? There's only so much you can do when you get 10 inches of water in about half a day, and that's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. And, Tim, one of the things that we looked at, and I know you looked at this as well, is, how frequent these kind of flood events are or aren't. And we use a term often, and I know it gets overused, I think misunderstood, is, recurrence frequency, right? We talk about, like, is this 1,000 or 500 or 100-year flood or rainfall event? We know for a fact that this area, I'm not familiar with the flood levels that would, for the basins, but I will tell you, for that area, looking at the curves, we know that this was probably a 1,000-year rainfall event for that time period in that area. You talked about Fran, and obviously I remember Fran, but I wasn't here. Fran was kind of more of a longer duration event. You mentioned this is half a day. In some of these cases, that rain fell in like 6 to 7 hours. Talk about the rainfall rates you saw up there. And, some of the isolated nature of it. I think that's the other thing that's fascinating to me, because when we showed the rainfall graphic today, people were shocked how little rain Raleigh got and how even in Greensboro it really wasn't that much. But you just go a little bit between the cities and holy cow, it's like a foot of rain fell in those areas.
It's so localized and, just a totally different world, like you were saying. That is the weird part, because typically a tropical system, it's pretty uniform that everybody's going to get a soaking rain. That's what was unusual about Chantal, is that it had this narrow little core. Looking at the accumulation map, it almost reminds me of where I grew up, which was lake effect snowland, and you would get these little localized convective bands of snowfall that were super localized. That's what this looks like to me. Over in Raleigh, you had 2/10 of an inch. Here in Greensboro at my house, we got about 1.5 inches. But in the middle, it was truly almost a foot of rainfall. And that's insane. You're getting multiple inches of rain per hour. And that's just not something that can be supported. So really tragic out there. It could have been worse. I'm glad people got to where they needed to get. But 1,000-year flood events, I mean, they don't happen all that often with good reason. I did compare this. We remember Hurricane Florence a couple years ago. With that one, we got about 10 inches of rain in our area, but that happened over like 4 days. This is half a day to 2/3 of a day in those spots. So really, really different. And we're looking at some of these pictures now of homes that have some water coming up to them. Hyco Lake was the one that had a lot of these boat houses and docks that got shifted around and really messed up. The lake levels were a lot higher too. So there's only so much you can do with that water once it collects on the ground. The way a flood works is you have the rain come down, then it runs off, it goes into the creeks, goes into the bigger streams, then it goes to the bigger rivers. And in our state, we have a lot of those rivers that flow into bigger man-made lakes. And so those lakes were rising at a pretty rapid rate as well. Now we are seeing it go down pretty quickly. So in our evening reports here, we started to show you what's left when it's receding and kind of that cleanup effort. But did start to notice a picture or two of some of the tornado damage. 4 tornadoes were confirmed today, or from yesterday, I should say. We're still waiting on some of the numbers from Raleigh. They're working on those reports. That's a lot of work for one person to do, 4 tornado summaries. But I'd expect most of these will be EF0s and EF1s. It wasn't that windy yesterday, so if that damage was out there, it was probably because of a tornado. 2 of those were in that Alamance County area, another one near Sanford, another one near Chatham. One of the ones I think I missed was down by Wilmington. I think that happened on Saturday in New Hanover County. So I think it was about 5 for Chantal. And you know, these storms can always give us fits. Tornadoes was becoming the issue, and then the flooding superseded that really quickly last evening.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, about tornadoes. Thanks for getting into that, because it was 5 total tornadoes, and I believe the one in Wilmington actually was the first U.S. tropical tornado of the season too, so it was actually kind of noteworthy as well. Right. I wanted to ask you this because obviously we talked about in our local weather. I caught a little bit of yours. We got a pretty wet pattern shaping up later this week. Are you concerned with the areas that, especially in between Greensboro and Raleigh, that got hit with this heavy rain, about additional flood concerns this week and maybe even less rain causing issues because of the saturated soils, and these rivers and creeks are going to stay pretty high through the middle and end of the week?
I'm a little worried because, especially with the pattern that we have coming up, it's not like you have major forcing that's going to move these storms right along. It seems like they might be kind of meandering or slow movers, and that's not what you want to see in the summertime. If you get a storm that's not really moving much and it's not getting pushed around all that quickly, it can sit. And so what you could get into Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, those would be the 3 best chances for rain. Some of those storms could be slow, and even in the areas that didn't flood over the weekend, I think anybody could have some sort of a flash flooding risk, which isn't unusual for the summertime. But at this point, we have to talk about storm anxiety too. This is our first tropical system since Helene. People are going to have that storm anxiety anytime the tropics are mentioned. This isn't going to help. You just went through a pretty traumatic thing last night. I mean, we had people getting caught in their cars. We had water rescues. I think anytime you're going to have rain in the forecast the rest of the summer, maybe for the next year in those areas, people are going to be nervous. They're going to be a little bit more scared. And hate to put rain in the forecast this week, but that's just the way that it looks. And what are you thinking, Brett, as far as totals? Kind of seems like maybe 2 to 3 inches, but as we know, there will be areas that have more and areas that probably get 0.
Yeah, that's my biggest concern, is like we don't know where these specific areas are going to get hit. And because the pattern, like you said, is kind of stagnant, it just takes a 2 or 3 day period where the same area might get hit multiple times and we might have issues. So that is a concern this week. And I'm glad you brought up the storm anxiety. We actually specifically made a graphic showing no impacts for the mountains and foothills, just to make sure people understood, hey, this was not going to impact them. But I wanted to go back to the rainfall flood event thing, because this might be the most confusing term, might be more confusing than chance of rain. When you hear the 100, 200, 300 year flood, people think, okay, this should only happen every 300 years. But statistically, a 1,000-year flood event has a 0.1% chance of happening every year. Same with the 100-year. it could happen every year. It's a 1% chance. So it's that weird statistical way we kind of word this. It's 1 over 100 is basically the stat. So there's a 1 in 100 chance of that flood happening in any given year. And I think people think, wow, how could this happen so frequently when it's supposed to only happen every couple hundred years? So sometimes I hate that term, but I also think it helps people understand it. But that's for people that see that term, just so you understand what's going on. So, Tim, I think we're going to have to keep an eye on these rain chances this week. Hope you guys stay safe out there and the water goes down quickly. Of course, we'll have you covered. We'll probably be talking more about this throughout the week right here on Live Weather Impact. But don't go anywhere. WCNC Plus and WFMY Plus, stick around.